Hey, welcome back to Dev Radio, where we're talking to people across all of Microsoft who are doing really cool and interesting things. As always, I have Matt with me. Hey, Matt, how are you?
Doing good. Looking forward to today.
And I want to welcome back Chris Tremblay. Chris, we had a great session last time talking about your journey to Microsoft. Um, Welcome back. Glad to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, you mentioned Azure Pet Store, and really excited to have you back to talk about that. We brought along one of your colleagues, Peter Messina. Peter, glad to have you on. Uh, Basically, I'm going to get out of the way because some of the technical demos you were talking about, some of the stuff that you even showed to Matt and I in the pre-show just already, I'm pretty excited to see it. Went right into the DevOps dashboard, and I said, you know what, this is right up the alley for our audience. So I'm going to just pop your desktop up here for everybody to see, mute my microphone, sit back, kick my feet up, maybe get a swig of water, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on, Azure Pet Store, what we should know, why we should explore it, and what's interesting out there for us to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll kick it off with kind of like before showing the actual e-commerce website or the hypothetical e-commerce website. I'll kick it off with just kind of giving you the illustration, right? The architecture. And Pete, feel free to chime in and keep me honest. But as I mentioned in the previous show, when I came on to Microsoft, I had really no experience with Azure. So the goal for me was to study for AZ 204, get acclimated with all the services. Ultimately, my job responsibility is to, help my customers be more productive on Azure, right? Really helping developers do more with Azure. And if I was going to do that successfully, I need firsthand experience, right? Like I'm a hands-on learner. So I was like, it started with one of my clients. The first introduction I had with one of my early clients was API management. How do I do rate limit throttling? And I was like, that's a great question. I don't know. So let me go figure it out. And as I mentioned in the previous show, like it was great to learn about various Azure App Dev related services, past services. But how could I learn about them and reuse my learnings, right? So I said, like, rather than just helping customers on a one-off basis, what if I make this more reusable, right? What if I make a demo that I could use, this living demo that's constantly growing and just kind of reuse it and make it scale for not only me, but for my customers, my peers, and, other colleagues at Microsoft, or really anyone technically that's interested in learning about Azure. So that's kind of what you see here. I took the experiences I had over the last 20 years or so as a full stack developer doing, front end development, whether it's, Angular, progressive web apps, and pushing and pulling data to the middle tier all the way to the back end. So I kind of took that experience and kind of built out what I thought, folks would be interested from an app innovation perspective. So I started small. I started with a couple services, a web app, then I introduced API management. And that's kind of what you see here. It's really anything and everything app innovation related on Azure, and it's constantly growing. We have some things to add here as container apps is kind of a new service that I'd like to get in here. But if you think about web applications, right, and in this scenario, an e-commerce website, and I'll show that in a moment, you really have a developer, right, writing some type of software to push out into the cloud. And that's what you see here. You got a developer working in VS Code, and they're pushing and pulling into Azure, right? And in this scenario, all the software, the web apps and the microservices are built in Java, but the language is really irrelevant, right? If you want to go out and explore Azure Pet Store and get acclimated with what you see today, you don't have to have any Java experience. You really don't need any software development experience at all. I have some of my colleagues that are using this and they haven't written any code before. I'll show, but all of the apps and services are using Docker multi-stage builds. So if you want to do this locally, all you'll need is Docker, Java, Maven. All of that is taken care of for you from a Docker perspective. or you could just, fork this and put this right into your own, GitHub repository and not even do anything locally. Just use, the compute from Azure, DevOps, GitHub, and you're off to go.
And Chris, I think, you touched on it a little bit. I think the thing I really like about this is a lot of conversations that you and I have with customers really focus on sort of the app space, right? And app services. This is a good diagram. It actually shows how they interconnect. A lot of times what we spend, you and I spend those sort of initial conversations of like, how do we pull out the services that they really care about and that they want to focus on? Even like logic apps, right? The logic apps piece of it feels new to a lot of customers, and how they manage it. Where does it plug in? What are its benefits? And where can I put it in the architecture? This one diagram here slims it down enough for customers to just focus on these services. And this is what I care about from like a simple web application.
Yeah, absolutely. And Pete and I work really well together. I'm glad you brought that up. Like, so part of like this whole initiative that I started when I started thinking about Azure Pet Store was, let me have something to show customers, get acclimated with, something that's real and they can relate to. But it allows me to, keep the conversations going, earlier, in fact, longer, right? With a customer, I might be on a discovery call and somebody's interested in something Azure related. Maybe it's CI/CD, blue-green deployments, rate limit throttling with APIM. I could just jump into Azure Pet Store and kind of like spark inspiration with the client, show them what they don't know. And when things get deeper and they're interested and they want to zero in, I can pull in, my counterparts, my experts like Pete Messina, and really kind of helps, drive those conversations more efficiently, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So you got a developer working in VS Code. In this scenario, it's Java. And then, so if you don't know, DevOps is really our flagship one-stop shop for all agile development, SDLC type process. But we also have GitHub, right? Another awesome product that Microsoft has acquired. So I kind of have the ability, because in my domain we cover DevOps, we cover GitHub. So I've got the services behind Azure Pet Store. Those are being deployed through what's called Azure DevOps pipelines, and then the app service is using GitHub Actions. So I have the way to orchestrate via both platforms, and then user stories, test plans, boards, all of that agile methodology is being done in Azure DevOps today. So I've got this action that will push into app service if I want to make a change to the web app, right? The HTML-based MVC web app for the e-commerce site. And then I've got DevOps pipelines, which, I'll probably show today. I've got those for the three different services pushing into Azure Kubernetes services, right? So if you think about the Azure Pet Store, I haven't shown it yet, but there's a pet service, a product service, and an order service. And they can scale independently with Kubernetes. We've got API management sitting in between that, Swagger, open API spec. And then a few other nice things of Azure in here, right? Once an order has been completed, that order can get pushed into a service bus. And there's a nice logic app that can consume and craft a nice HTML email and send that off to the user. There's a Power App in here as well, right? Maybe I thought it might be nice to get some type of telemetry on what's going on. And sure, there's all, application insights, Power BI. There's a lot of ways to get at your rich telemetry, but I was like, maybe I'll build a Power App in here to show how you can pull data out of application insights, and it's proxying through a function app to do that. The function app is really to show how you can put some lightweight code out there, some serverless code to
extending the functionality of the application without changing the code base or taking on additional risk. Yeah, that's pretty cool. The other thing that really stood out to me is you use a Docker across the entire stream, whether you're using pipeline, and this is our shameless self plug, right, Matt? We have webinars coming up on both GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps on doing builds, both whether they're your native language of choice or you want to do nested Docker builds of your Docker containers. So if you're interested in this type of stuff, stay on this live session and stay on this channel. We're gonna keep having content about this.
Yeah.
How about pipelines around API management, Chris? I mean, is this going to scale and grow from like a policy management perspective? I mean, again, like a lot of the questions that we get really are, API management is broken up into sort of different pieces. Policy management being really a big chunk of what API management can offer. At some point, do you think this will actually scale and grow to offer pipelines and sort of guidance around like the API management and the policies themselves?
Yeah. Right now, at the moment, I've got one subscription, so the web app is in the Power App can consume off that one subscription, right? So the web app, the MVC based app, is kind of the proxy into APIM.
Yeah.
We can certainly add, maybe there's a subscription for each service or a subscription for the Power App, right? Like obviously, this isn't quite hardened for a real world production, high volume scale. But yeah, we can totally evolve this. Absolutely. So yeah, this is a high level, and we've also got B2C in here, so you can authenticate users with our identity management platform, Key Vault, and we're adding to this, right? Like Pete and I had some ideas on like maybe we do container apps, maybe we'll throw in Azure Spring Cloud, or like at the end of the day, and I'll show it here. If you scroll down, there are all the guides that will walk you through on how to do this in your own environment, right? You come in here and follow each guide. The first guide is, set up your environment, right? So you set up your environment, you walk through it, talks you through how to, fork the repository. And then there's a nice little easy button here that will allow you to deploy some of the fundamental resources right into Azure. And then as you walk through, it takes you through the next is to build the Docker images, right? Like how do you build these Docker images locally? So you follow through, and then when you're building them locally, you come up when you got the Swagger Pet Store, right? And there's a Swagger API for each, right? So the Pet Store is the Pet API, then you got the Product API, and then the Order API down here, and the Store API rather. And then last but not least, you have the MVC application. I'll show this thing in real time, but the whole idea is as you walk through each guide, you're setting up and you're building out all the pieces, right? Fundamentally, in guide one, you get the app up and running without API management, right? Then the next piece is you connect API management. Subsequently, you connect the application insights. Down the line, function app, power apps. It all kind of builds together. And that was kind of the idea, right? Have these guides readily available. If somebody wants to learn about something, I could come in here and show like, oh, do you want to learn about application insights, for example, and what that is, what type of data we're pushing and pulling into Azure. I can walk you through the type of, telemetry that we capture. And then it shows like how to set it up and all the different, code required in your application. Again, these guides will talk about code and how to configure your app. The nice part about all of this is the apps that are built out in, if I show you the repository, these apps that are built out, I've got a Pet Store app, which is the HTML MVC app, and then 3 services. If I just crack them open, all of the code is in here. You don't have to write code to enable application insights or API management. Right now, by default, the code is making service calls, looking in sending headers needed for subscriptions, or writing the rich telemetry to the logs, but if you don't have it enabled, then it will just go nowhere, right? So in other words, by just passing in the subscription ID argument at runtime, or passing in certain parameters at runtime, will enable and start turning on the application code at runtime to do this certain thing.
How about the developer portal? So I know you talked a little bit about the Swagger documents, and you're talking about a little bit about the code here as well. Do you have anything in here that's actually going to talk to or scale out to the developer portal on the API management side, show how it actually exposes the Swagger documentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so if you were to pull in API management, if you were to get in, be interested in API management, you could come into the API management guide. Am I glancing over it? pipeline should be right here. Yep. So this kind of talks through how to pull in an open API Swagger spec. So that's what I'm doing, right? So each service that's running and in your Kubernetes cluster will have a Swagger JSON that you can pull in to Azure API management, right? So what that allows you to do is it allows you to take that contract, right? This is contract first development. You've got Swagger. And again, I didn't craft this Swagger JSON. I went out to the open internet, and there's a project out there called PetStore. So if you think about contract first development, you might have a consumer of a service. You've got an author of a service. They want to work independently. The service isn't complete yet, right? They start with the contract, the blueprint, if you will, and then they go off and they both implement in independently. And there's a project out there called PetStore. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I went with PetStore. I didn't want to have to reinvent the wheel, so by having this contract, Spring has some nice plugins available, open source plugins in the Spring framework to auto generate, stubs, if you will, for service integration. So at any rate, I took these open source JSON specs, right? They're just HTTP operations and the different endpoints for the services. And then as Pete mentioned, you can pull those right into Azure API management out of the box. And it will, so if you come in here and you say open API, create from, you give it that JSON, right? So if I was to give it one of these raw JSON files, it will automatically, pull in the service or construct an API for that service with all the different operations.
Yeah, you have that Swagger file that also works with local tooling too. So if you like Postman, then yeah, and then obviously if you have it at the endpoint, then that just makes it even easier. So just buying into that whole ecosystem can make your whole dev workflow, test workflow, integrating with partners just so much smoother.
And then it's generating the service right now. So I've got one already pre-created for the product service, the pet service, and the order service. And here it is. It created another one for me, and it gave it an API title called Swagger Pet Store because that was the descriptor in that JSON. And then here are all the services. And as Pete mentioned, like we can go through here, and the service isn't even done yet, right? Like this is just a contract, but I can then start stubbing out data. So maybe I'm a front end Angular developer, or I'm an iOS developer, and independently, I don't need to know or care if and when the service has been developed. I'm working off this API. And then I could start applying subscriptions and policies. And as Pete mentioned, there's a whole developer portal. And but I guess that's the point. My goal, my objective of building Azure Pet Store is to make all of this kind of readily available for really, for my learning, my customers, my peers, my colleagues, and we can just kind of show anything. So if I was to just come in here and make a change, for example, I'll just come in here and make a change to some code and show like the CI/CD process, right? That comes up a lot. Customers, routinely ask Pete and I. We were on a call just the other day. Folks were interested in hardening their DevOps culture. What does it look to do blue-green deployments, control your own destiny, regression tests? How do I do automation tests? And these kind of things come up a lot. So if I come into a service here, petstoreorderservice, and I'm just going to come in here and make a change. So I'm going to go into the model object here. I have a model object. I'm just going to make a change to a static string here. So I have a string in here called author. Now there's a version information file, a metadata file called version.json with all of these services. It kind of gives metadata about the service, the hash, the version, the date, so you can do things with that data at runtime. Like for example, see what build is out there in prod. All right, so I'm to push this into, actually, I want to probably, yeah, I want to prefix this with, I'm going to prefix this. I'll get into this in a minute with a AB for Azure boards, pound 14, I think is the story. So I have I think that's the story I have. Let's check. Kind of jumping all around here.
So behind the scenes,
realistic.
Behind the scenes, Chris, is what's going to happen, right? Is it going to, once you create that pull request, going to run a build specifically on that feature branch, and then it's going to push for an approval, or how did you structure the actual process with the DevOps flow?
Yep, great question. So for this scenario, I'm doing trunk-based development. I'm working right on the main branch. So if I go into workflows, sorry, let's go back here to DevOps pipelines. Mm-hmm. So the DevOps pipelines is controlling the service code. The GitHub Actions is controlling the MVC web app code. I'm making a change to the petstoreorderservice. So if I look at the petstoreorderservice pipeline, you'll see that anytime this only happens when people are watching. I got to approve. So to Pete's point, the way I have this set up is anytime a change is made on the main branch, but again, this repository has many different projects. So in the pet store order project, specifically, any change kick off this build. And it's a multi-stage build, right? It's 3 stages. The build stage, which will do some security analysis, runs from cred scan to check if there's any passwords, etc. It'll create that version JSON file that I was talking about, the version, the author, etc. And this is kind of a, just a nice to have file, metadata about the build. And then it will execute Maven to do the compilation. It'll run the unit test, the JUnit test. And then last but not least, it will kick off the deployment. Not last but not least, the next step is the deployment. Kick off the deployment into Azure Kubernetes Services, and then last but not least, we'll run the automations regressions test. So let's go ahead. Let's kick that off, and then we'll come back to it after. So if I go back into Pet Store Order Service, go into source, main, Java, model, container environment, edit this file. And then here you can see the delta, and we'll push this guy right in.
And so you've got gates in place, and so that's what you're going to start showing next, right? And so you've got unit tests that'll run, stop it if one of those unit tests fail, and then the approval process can happen there.
Exactly. So typically a developer, you wouldn't work directly on main. You'd probably work on a feature branch, and developers would, maybe they'd have a feature branch and they'd collaborate together. Maybe there's subsequent changes, intraday changes. Once that feature branch has been, fully, completed, right? You're satisfying your unit test for the acceptance test for the user story at hand, in this case AB14. Then you'll go ahead and you'll merge it. Maybe there's some peer collaboration. Maybe I want to have a peer review with Pete, for example. And then once that looks good, it'll kick off the build. So you'll see here I've got for some reason I have all 4 builds going. Not exactly sure why. There should just be one. It should just be the pet store order service that's building. All 4 are building for some reason. I might have touched another file that all 4 are tied to. But if I pull this up, and we'll let this go and we'll come back because it'll take a few moments. it's going to run through all three stages. It's going to run the build stage. It's going to show you the unit test, right? Because there's some unit tests associated. It's going to then do the deployment stage. And then last but not least, it's going to kick off the automation stage. So it comes up a lot, like how do I do unit test development? And we can kind of walk through. And this is kind of like just a catalyst to show other developers like kind of the art of the possible.
Are you also showing unit test output, like percentage complete, percentage pass, which ones pass, sort of that output board within DevOps?
Yeah. Like you mean like the dashboard, the roll up?
Yep.
Yeah. That's one of the compelling reasons that developers or really, project managers, anyone, they like to see that roll up. Once the build is complete, we'll get the I could show a previous.
Yeah. A lot of questions. I mean, Chris, we get around like the well-architected framework when you start to get into essentially architecture reviews of applications and unit test plans. How do I see certain things like code coverage and percentage of test pass? How do I keep track of it? We get a lot of questions here as well, and how can they be pushed forward?
Yeah. This is the previous build that I ran, but I have just one unit test, right? I'm working. Typically you have a unit test for each, code in isolation, function, method in isolation, right? You're testing the class level at the class level for your changes. And in this scenario, I was making an author change, or there's a unit test for a version change. At any rate, this is just one unit test that you can see in the order service. That's testing the code. That's a unit level test. There's a regression suite that's going to kick off, right? Because just imagine you've got three services. Pete might be working on the product service. I'm working on the pet service or the order service. We're working independently. At the end of the day, there's these services are making up the e-commerce pet store application, which I haven't even showed yet. But
it's okay. I was gonna say, like, it gets really fascinating the deeper you dig in. Like, I'm working on a project right now where we have a really good suite of unit tests, but they never put any thought into integration tests. And so when we did integration test suite, we were able to use stuff like Visual Studio Code's remote containers, and then push those into a Docker Compose build, push that into Azure pipelines, and create a single Docker Compose file that spun up. It was a database. I can't remember the word now. A tool to move data between different databases. That spins up 6 different open source databases and transfer data in a web between all of them and make sure the data is identical when it gets back to its source data. And so stuff like that, to be able to not only do it, but to see it in Azure pipelines, and then see that kicked off post published to make sure that there's no discrepancy. And that really long running integration test that you would never want to run on your local machine. Be able to borrow somebody else's machine for that, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, like it's a good point. Like I'm writing a unit test I didn't write a unit test in this scenario to ensure that the author change was made properly. I probably should have had a unit test in there, but that's testing my code in isolation. Then I have this separate project. This is a pet store automation project that, just imagine you have a quality engineering team that's working on the regression suite, if you will, right? This doesn't live in production. It's not part of the application code. It runs as think of it as like a sidecar. It's a side project, for internal use to ensure that the production code is behaving, right? So this regression suite is using HTML unit and JUnit to really inspect the HTML and ensure, right? So I made a change to a service, but I want to make sure that the whole application is fully functional. Can I still get to the AzurePetStore.com? Am I getting a title back as a smoke test? All right, now are all the pets still coming back, right? I made a change to the service. Are the pets? So here's where you would add all of your unit tests to ensure that your full e-commerce application is still behaving. So we'll let that run. And while we do, I can kind of just walk through the Azure Pet Store. Now, I don't expect anyone to come out here and search for pets or products and actually expect to make a real order. The whole idea is to just kind of show the art of the possible. So it's just, I'm already authenticated with Azure B2C, so I could come in here as Chris and I can shop by products. So I'm going to shop for dog products. I've got a bunch of breeds here. So this is hitting the pet service. Now I'm going to shop by product. So maybe I want to shop by toys. So I'm going to hit the product service. So here's some toys. Maybe I add the lamb to my shopping cart. So now the shopping cart order service, the store service has my my item in a cart. I got some breadcrumbs down here, right? I've got some container information. So as we start to talk about scale and with app service, we can show that you get a different container and we can see how that works. And we got the version ID, which is the hash of the build, the date, the session ID for n-tiered correlated telemetry. So if I want to see what Chris is doing across all the services, maybe I get a production issue, incident occurs at 2 a.m. in the morning, I could come in here and is really just kind of showing how all this ties together. Application insights, KQL is really powerful. So this is a nice way to kind of tie it all together. So that's kind of that. That's the app, if you will. Let's see if this thing has completed. Yep. So all the builds executed. Again, since everyone's watching, they all executed. I was hoping just one would execute. But when the order service was done, that last step was to trigger the regression suite. So that executed as well. And you can see that the 2 unit test passed, right? So this is nice because Pete mentioned earlier we could put gates, checks, and approvals in place. Like, hey, if any of the regression suite fails, like you need to roll this thing back, right? Like, or maybe in a production scenario, like we don't go right to production, we go to a deployment slot, which is for smoke testing. Like, at any rate, the whole idea behind this is to show the art of the possible, have something running in Azure so we can quickly start showing folks on calls, real time, the art of the possible. We can get in here and just start making changes, turning knobs and dials real time. Like if I come back here and I search for dog breeds, I'm making a call to the service every time, right? The dog breeds probably aren't changing intraday, right? Maybe they change monthly, yearly. I don't know. I don't need to call the service. But there's a lot of things that programmatically I'm doing to trigger, telemetry to show things, right? So I'm calling the service every time. This should probably in a production app get cached up in the app. I have a rate limit in place, right? I can only call this service n number of times, a fixed number of times before I exhaust my consumption for that subscription. So I can show customers that. Like this is one of the first things that came up on one of my customer calls. So if I jump over to the product, I have a product in here called Pet Store Reseller, another nice feature of API management. You can expose your APIs. There's a whole developer portal. I have you can come in here with a concept of products, and that's how you think about maybe you want to monetize a service, for example, right? So you have a product and different resellers of the Azure Pet Store service or different resellers of the Pet Store data can consume it. Maybe it's the Azure Pet Store or maybe it's another retailer, for example. So at any rate, I have a policy in place. Like I can only make for this subscription, for this policy, I can only make 200 calls every 30 seconds. If I change that to 2, I can then show like, hey, here's how you would introduce a policy. And I come back over here and I hit reload a couple times. Like now that HTTP call is getting a 429, right? Because as you know, we've exhausted the limit. I think it's just kind of a catalyst to just do things in Azure.
That's great. It shows how everything plugs together. And again, it's we can sort of throw and talk about diagrams and pieces here, but the nice piece about that is it really shows it. It shows service to service how we can utilize different pieces.
Yeah.
So I think the real fun here is just getting people out here touching it, playing around. I'll just put the GitHub URL out there one more time. Playing around with this, having fun, trying out different things, finding different extensibility points. Like for instance, I don't have Java on my machine. Can I go pull down a Java container from Docker Hub so that I can just run a Java environment virtually with the Visual Studio Code just to be able to edit code and things like that? If I see your dark breeze things, maybe I want to use API management as a proxy and swap out the backend for something like Azure Search. Maybe I want to throw Azure Cache for Redis in the middle somewhere between API management and AKS. Like there's so many, like this could almost be a hackathon, right? Like this is the exciting type of things you can see with what you're doing. So Chris, this is again really interesting.
Yeah, even Dapper, right? As you extend the services, getting Dapper involved in here and showing how that connects, and then how we get telemetry and different services connected. Even just through that from a caching perspective would be huge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So like the whole Kubernetes, like we can go so deep. Like that's the kind of the whole idea behind this is like I'll get on customer calls, and just kind of do discovery. Like how can we help a customer? What are they struggling with? What's out there that we can assist with, right? And a lot of the times they don't even know what they don't know, right? So for me to just go in there and show the art of the possible, it really paves the way for me to then to bring in Pete and say, hey, Pete, I had a really awesome call today with, this customer. I showed them, they didn't even know AKS could do horizontal pod auto scaling or CADA. And I showed them about ingress controllers. And then now they really want to do like a demo or a POC. And then Pete's got the expertise where he can then take it the next step, and just really allows us to reach more customers faster. And I was just going to kind of show but yeah, all of the Docker builds are multi-stage builds. So for example, you don't even need to know any Java. Like right now, locally, I could build, each application by just saying Docker build, right? Docker build -t, give it a tag name, petstoreapp, and it's going to go out and it's going to execute. This is the petstoreapp, right? The HTML app, and it's going to, again, I just have Docker. I don't need Java, Maven, and it's going to say, go out and get Maven, right? Maven is the compilation for Java, and it's going to use Java Development Kit 17, and it's going to do the build. And then the next stage, it's going to go out and get, Microsoft OpenJDK 17, right? So we've got the ability to kind of, do compilation, destroy, take the artifact from compilation, and then use it in a subsequent stage, which is the package stage, create the actual Docker image, if you will. And so a lot of good stuff in here. And yeah, like Pete said, we plan to just keep growing this. And Azure introduces new services almost daily, it seems, right? Pete mentioned Dapper. There's container apps that's out there, and
container registry. You could automate all of these task builds with container registry.
Yep.
And not just new services, it's new stuff you're learning with existing services. Like I've been doing multi-stage Docker builds forever, but I just learned this week that with Blazor, you could do a multi-stage build onto Nginx and not run anything Microsoft on your production site. Never knew that. And this is my first time ever seeing somebody use OpenJDK as the opposite, as the actual, let's call it the runtime Docker image on their multi-stage Java build. I've seen multi-stage Java builds before, never seen that. So like, it's just pretty awesome. Like, even if you're already familiar with the services, the stuff you see that you haven't even tapped into before. Like I haven't played around. I played around with Azure pipelines quite a bit, used them on projects, never done anything on the code coverage side of the house. Never done anything on the unit test coverage other than to just measure the percentage of unit tests that pass and add a simple gate around that percentage.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my way of saying, like, everybody in the audience, has different levels of experiences. So I encourage everyone to just jump in, try this out. You're going to find something in this project, just like I did, that you have absolutely no clue about. And you're going to say, oh, that is why they did it that way. And I completely get it now. And you're going to want to implement it in one of your own projects. I strongly encourage it. I'm stalling a little bit because it looks like Chris is doing something really interesting here.
Yeah, and then so that's it. Like now you have the MVC app up and running locally, localhost 8080. You clone the code, you built the doc, you compiled the code and built a Docker image within that one multi-stage build. And then if I click on Dogbreeze, it's going to fail because I don't have the other services up and running right now. But you get the idea. So you can do it all locally. You can do it, in the cloud. So that app is now running locally. So I'll kill that. But a lot of good stuff in here. A lot of room for growth, though. This thing, if you look back at the version history, like it was much smaller on this image. It just keeps growing, right? Power Apps is in here, functions. We'll keep adding to it, right? Because that's the beauty of cloud. It's a challenge just to keep up, and I'll definitely lean on Pete for some of the heavy lifting.
Absolutely.
So, Chris, thank you so much for coming on. This was pretty amazing. Lots of really useful information you shared today. I'm pretty sure our audience is absolutely going to be slammed researching all of this, trying to implement and deploy this. I'm already seeing people jump in and off the live stream, so that's just a good sign that this is just interesting stuff. Again, expect to look at that diagram and see it double in size in about a year. So really looking forward to that. Thanks again, both you and Peter, for sharing your expertise. We're gonna get you both on again someday. To share us updates, anything like that. For everybody else, Dev Radio, we're gonna always bring people to you that's doing some really cool things in the Azure space. So make sure, if you're not already subscribed to our channel or haven't already turned notifications on, we're going to go live more often. So you want to know when we're going live so you can ask questions in the chat while we're here and get answer you in real time and get your question live on the stream. So Chris and Peter, thank you so much for coming on again.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much. Great resource. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.